Now I want to talk about my vision for Australia's future, along with what I mean when I say that my goal is to save the world, because they are ultimately one and the same. Australia has the potential to lead the way, environmentally, economically, internationally, towards a human development focused future. We could be the balance between the global north and south, between the civilizations of east and west. But we have to get our own shit together first, or else this is all just bluster from another US puppet state. Australia is currently set up as a continuation of our settler colonial past. Our constitution is written according to the principles of liberal democracy, which focuses on upholding the private sector. Capitalism and private property ownership is the driver of our national development. Government favours the private sector over the public because our entire legal system is set up that way. Neoliberalism just takes it a step further by privatising public assets to gradually dismantle the power of the government. Because government is the only thing that can regulate big business, and the smaller the government, the less power it has to keep them in check. This is not likely to change if we maintain the current Liberal Labour duopoly. Both are in the pockets of big business. However, as the Liberal Party is currently collapsing, there is an opportunity to replace them as a major party and take our country in a different direction. I think now is the time for a party to run on making Australia an independent republic, and not just replace the Crown with an Australian head of state, but replace the Constitution that limits our development. The Australian Constitution has authority because Act within the British Parliament says it does. Declaring independence and removing the Crown means the legitimacy of our nation is now on us. Who will we be as a people? What will we stand for? How will we structure our government and society? Do we just maintain the liberal democracy status quo? New boss, same as the old boss? Or do we take the opportunity to forge our own path? This is our time to be aspirational about who we want to be as a people and what we want our country to be. We have the chance to build the foundation of our future for the future Australians to pursue their dreams. We can discard the capitalism first focus of liberal democracy with a human centered democratic socialist republic. We get all of the benefits of living in a democracy with a government and legal system focused on the public good rather than the for profit private sector. We could even expand our civil rights by codifying a Bill of Rights with rights to free speech, privacy, and the ownership of our own data. We could make Medicare a truly universal healthcare system that covers everything, people over profit. The strength of Medicare is its universality. When everybody gets it, nobody will let you take it away, which is why so many government programs are means tested to exclude people. We could make education public, universal, and free. Give every child the same opportunities regardless of their parents' finances. Give every adult the chance to continue their education without taking on debt. We could have universal social housing, ensuring everyone has not only a roof over their head, but high quality housing that's suitable for the Australian climate. People can still own their own homes, but private property ownership should not be the extent of the Australian dream. Australians should dream bigger. Will the sky be the limit, or should Australian children dream of reaching the stars? We could have a universal basic income, which will eventually become necessary as automation and AI make large portions of our workforce redundant. We could eliminate poverty entirely. People could work fewer days and hours for the same pay and spend more time with their families and friends, bringing free time and disposable income into local economies. We could focus more on the happiness of our people rather than just our GDP and stock market indices. We can regulate capitalism to keep its predatory nature from destroying our planet and ourselves. We can work on reconciling with Indigenous Australians. We can't undo what was done, we can't give back everything that was stolen, but we can try to make amends for what was done. We can include them and their cultures in the future we build. As a unified people, we can ensure that everyone is provided for, from the first Australians before us to the next Australians after. We need to do this to give people hope that there will be a future, not just a survivable or livable future, but one in which our children can thrive. Platitudes are not enough. You actually have to act. People need tangible reasons to hold on to hope. The driving force behind humanity for most of our history has been to provide our children a better world than the one we were born into. Yet we've been forced to reluctantly concede that the world will now only ever get worse. One generation has taken everything for themselves and are leaving nothing for those who come after. The rich get richer, everyone else gets poorer, and the can just keeps getting kicked further down the road for the required action on climate change. But hey, have more kids. The economic machine needs fresh blood. Don't worry about how you afford to provide for them. You'll figure something out. Your parents did, and it's not like the world's a different place now, right? But if we want the government to do anything for us, suddenly it's, how are we going to pay for it? The debts, the deficits. $368 billion for AUKUS? No problem. $30 billion for a new submarine shipyard? That's affordable. A pittance for you? We just don't have the budget for that. You know, inflation. We need to cut spending. If it's for politicians or private businesses, like building car parks or sports stadiums and their electorates, then the federal government seemingly has infinite money, because they virtually do. This is explained by modern monetary theory, or MMT. We've been propagandized to believe that a government budget is the same as a household budget, but that is just not true. Australia has a sovereign currency, the Australian dollar. All of our debts and interest payments are in Australian dollars. The Australian federal government is the issuer of the currency. They can never run out of it. That doesn't mean they have unlimited money though. The more they create, the less value it has. This does contribute to inflation. The buying power of the dollar diminishes and prices rise. You can counter inflation, however, by taking money back out of the economy through taxation, which you would do specifically by raising taxes on the richest people, the ones who can afford to pay more without a decrease in their quality of life, and close the loopholes that allow corporations to make billions in revenue but pay zero in taxes. Do you think either of the major parties would ever run on raising taxes on the rich or making their corporate donors actually pay tax? It gives you a bit of an indication about who they actually represent, doesn't it? The principle of MMT is that if a resource exists and there is labor to use it, then the government can create the currency to activate the resource and pay the labor. Labor itself is also a resource, as is available labor, aka the unemployed. Unemployment is a resource. Without an available workforce, the government can't do anything, whether that be something new or an expansion of something existing. That's why the government won't give people a job guarantee. If we have 100% employment, then there's zero available workforce. Now, we all know that that's not how it works in reality because people can change jobs, but that is an externality that is not factored into their economic calculations. The government needs unemployment, but it also demonizes it. It propagandizes people to hate dole bludgers and punishes the unemployed by forcing them to live on payments that are below the poverty line, while harassing them to find jobs that might not exist. Why do they do this? Because they're business focused. Poverty payments for unemployment suppresses wages and keeps people afraid of losing their jobs. I felt trapped in a job I previously had because I feared Centrelink poverty and harassment if I left, having had experienced it before, which was a legitimate fear because I ended up in poverty getting harassed by Centrelink after I having a mental breakdown wherein I stopped working. Ironically, it was the COVID pandemic that helped me. The lockdowns led to payment increases and the suspension of mutual obligations. Having enough money to live on and no harassment led to my mental health recovery. If not for that, I could have easily been another suicide statistic and the government would not have given two shits. This forms part of the motivation behind what I am doing now. It shouldn't take a global pandemic for the government to do right by their people, and they shouldn't just undo it as soon as they can. So many issues can be solved with just simple policy changes, but they'll always find an excuse for why it's not possible. Not legitimate reasons, just manufactured excuses. These are some of my ideas for what a future Australia could look like, but that is not for one person to decide. What do you want Australia to be? What future do you want your kids to inherit? Certain influencers are trying to popularise the idea of a far right, Pauline Hanson led, one nation colonial white Australia. Please explain? For anyone who doesn't get that reference, long story short, she's an ignorant fucking racist. She started her career hating Asians, now she's just generally xenophobic. And it's that kind of person that she appeals to, which is why she's been a largely inconsequential senator for the last 30 years. Big moneyed interests are trying to rehabilitate her image, but we haven't forgotten, and she hasn't changed. For them, she's just a useful idiot. Pauline Hanson has repeatedly failed to disclose that she's been travelling on the private jet of billionaire mining magnate and Australia's richest person, Gina Rinehart, who recently donated a $1 million plane to the One Nation Party. Gina Rinehart, who has also previously stated that she thinks Australian workers should be competing with African labourers earning $2 a day. Australia's richest person thinks the average Australian has too much money. Is that what we want? A nation where everyone is white but only earns $2 a day? Does that sound good to you? Do you think Pauline Hanson will suddenly become a fighter for the common man now that she has a billionaire's funding? Are we just going to keep trying already failed ideologies? Or would you rather we try something new? Do we aspire to be better? Let me ask you this question. What is our national goal or direction? What are we working towards long term as a nation? AUKUS? We're the lucky country. Someone will take a gamble on something and we'll get lucky. Do nothing and hope someone else figures it out. Because that's a good foundation for a society, right? The goal I would suggest is the concept of post-scarcity, which means reaching a state where all human needs and most wants can be provided with a minimal amount of human labour. It's basically what Star Trek used to be. People are free to pursue happiness and self-improvement rather than the sole focus of financial gain. This is not something any single nation can do alone. It would take a level of global cooperation. And you cannot have effectively unlimited resources in a finite system like the planet Earth. We would need to find a way of harvesting resources from space. As a long-term goal, it covers many issues that would need to be resolved. It gives us something to collectively work towards and the hope that the world will be a better place in the future, that there is something to look forward to for future generations. When I say my goal is to save the world, it's kind of hard to narrow down what that means because it covers so many things beyond just policy changes to improve the human condition. Post-scarcity covers most of those things. But let's get into some specifics. There are some big hurdles to cross, and the most obvious and important problem is climate change. Climate change is a slow burn extinction level event. While there are other potential apocalypses that could end humanity, like a Skynet style AI takeover or a planet killer asteroid hitting the Earth, climate change is not a potential apocalypse. It is definitely happening. At this point, it's only the extent of the damage that we can try to mitigate. And right now, globally, we are not doing enough to save the future of humanity. In some cases, we're even speeding up the decline. Many nations around the world have net zero targets. Net zero by 2050, 2060, 2070. What they don't tell you is that net zero is not enough. Net zero doesn't solve climate change. It's just one step on the path. Net zero isn't even zero carbon emissions. It's zero additional emissions above what was already being produced in a certain year. Individual nations get to decide which year it is for them, but the average is usually around 1995. Net zero emissions above the 1995 levels. which, even at those levels, we were still causing climate change. We need to take drastic civilization altering action just to ensure human civilization will continue. But right now, we collectively are metaphorically waiting until we have stage 4 lung cancer before we even attempt to quit smoking, hoping that somebody finds a cure before we have to change our behavior. We need to do better. It's not enough to just stop climate change, we need to develop a measure of climate control. Not only is that not happening, but in the coming years, climate language will shift away from sustainability and onto resilience. That is a sign that we have given up and that decline is inevitable. That we're no longer trying to stop the damage we're causing, but just become resilient to it. But climate change isn't our only problem. It isn't even our only environmental problem. We have identified 9 planetary boundaries that all life must live in balance with in order to survive. Climate change, defined as atmospheric carbon emissions, is just one of the boundaries. Some are related, like ocean acidification. As the world's oceans absorb more carbon from the atmosphere, they become increasingly acidic. Each time in Earth's history that these boundaries have been out of balance has coincided with mass extinction events. And right now we're doing poorly with about 7 of them. One vitally important boundary is the nitrogen-phosphorus cycle, which is responsible for creating fertile soil. Human agriculture disrupts this cycle. We spray pesticides to kill the bugs that eat our crops, but that also kills the bugs in the ground that help make fertile soil, like worms. The soil becomes lifeless dirt, so we use chemical fertilizers, nitrogen and phosphorus, to force the plants to grow. The food they produce is nutrient poor because there's no nutrients to absorb from the soil. The chemical fertilizers then get washed into rivers and streams where they cause an overgrowth of algae, which absorbs the oxygen from the water, leading to mass fish die-offs. Helping fix one issue can fix or prevent some of the downstream effects. The solution I see is large-scale vermiculture, worm farming. We can take our biological waste, the garden clippings, food waste, paper and cardboard, coffee grounds, even old clothing made from natural materials like cotton. We can take that waste and turn it into a valuable resource towards solving many interrelated issues. We can find the answers to the wicked problems plaguing humanity. All it takes is those with the power to act on them, having the curiosity to look for solutions. And not just solutions, but also new opportunities. Australia has one of the greatest solar potentials of anywhere on the planet. We could not only power ourselves 100% by solar and renewables, but we could also export electricity through undersea cables to Indonesia. Indonesia has a population 10 times the size of Australia, and by 2050 is expected to be the 4th largest economy in the world. We could help power their growth with Australian solar electricity, ensuring continuous foreign investment, cutting the carbon emissions of 2 countries, and punching well above our weight in combating climate change. It would also improve Australia's national security, as Indonesia would now have a stake in protecting our sovereignty. We wouldn't need to bandwagon with the US, take on their enemies, and commit ourselves to building and funding nuclear-powered war machines for decades to come. If Ukraine and Iran has taught us anything, it's that modern warfare is fought with cheap, rapidly produced drones. Submarines might not be vulnerable to drone attacks, but they're utterly useless in stopping them too. It's a waste of resources to counter a nation that is not a threat to us. With abundant solar electricity, we can invest in large-scale desalination. We are girt by sea, so let's make use of it. We could not only ensure a stable freshwater supply for our population, agriculture, and industry, we could also restore the flows of rivers and streams, or even create our own. If you want to terraform Mars, you need to figure out how to do it here first. Where better to work on that than a nation where 2/3 of the mainland is uninhabitable desert? Can we turn the red center green? As the world gets warmer, polar ice will melt and sea levels will rise. That will also cause groundwater levels to rise as well. Low-lying areas will flood permanently, creating new lakes and even inland seas. Does it not make sense to prepare for that? With abundant solar electricity and fresh water, you can create hydrogen, a fuel source of the future that could replace oil derived petrol. The only byproduct of hydrogen is water. There's never been a greater urgency to transition than right fucking now. We could potentially convert petrol driven cars to clean hydrogen powered faster than replacing them with electric cars, speeding up the decarbonization of society. Though a better move for society would be getting rid of the need to own cars. Our cities and suburbs are designed around access for cars instead of people. We build high density skyscrapers and single family detached homes with little of the medium density housing in between. That might have worked well in the past, but it's not serving us now. The single family detached homes have yards and lawns. We are the most arid inhabited continent on Earth, and we waste precious water and arable land to grow and maintain worthless ornamental grass. Because of the large footprint of these housing areas, there is typically no amenities within walking distance, cementing the need to own a car. We could do so much better with Barcelona style superblocks with communal green spaces and public transportation, making far better use of the land and creating healthier, more physically active communities. One issue with cities, suburbs, and the urban adjacent areas that often goes overlooked is light pollution. Light blasts from streetlights, buildings, and even advertisements, and it fills the local environment. Why is this a problem? Because it blocks out the stars at night. The brighter local light sources overpower the fainter, further light sources of the stars, and the night sky turns almost entirely black. If you live in an urban area, try going outside on a clear night and see how many stars you can see. How does that make you feel? You might not care about it, but what about your kids? We have generations that never see snow. Now we might end up making generations that never see the stars. How can Australian children dream of going to the stars if they can't even see them? Given how people react today, we'd probably end up with star denialists, people who deny the stars were ever real. They were a fairy tale or conspiracy. The solution here isn't as drastic as turning off all the lights and living in darkness. It's just a matter of redesigning lights and buildings to shield and direct light sources down to the ground rather than blasting in every direction. I have my concepts of what saving the world means, and I think Australia is perfectly placed to lead the charge. Beyond everything already mentioned, we could ban corporations and foreign investors from owning Australian residential properties, break up the concentrated market ownerships in media, grocery supermarkets, banks, and anywhere else they exist. The only institution that should ever be too big to fail is the government. Anything else should be nationalised or broken up. We could even nationalise our mining sector so that everyone benefits from our collectively owned resources rather than just foreign owned transnational corporations and a handful of Australian billionaires. But this isn't just about me and my ideas. I want to know what saving the world means to you. I want to know what you think will make Australia better. What is your vision for an independent Australia? Do you even want Australia to be independent? Where do you see the problems? What policy positions do you think will help? Are there opportunities you see that are going unrecognised? A lot of Australian culture was introduced. We were founded as British and flooded with American media. We even celebrate Christmas with its winter theme despite it being summer here. But we are not British or American. We have our own unique identity and values. Essential to our character is the concept of mateship, which relates to equality, friendship, and fraternity. It's typically seen as masculine, but it's not exclusively so. Women can be your mates, your friends are your mates, your family are your mates, your partner is your mate, your kids are your mates, your colleagues are your workmates. The teenager working at the fast food restaurant that apologizes that your order is taking so long is reassured, no worries, mate, it takes as long as it takes. But the equality of mateship isn't just for positive relations or interactions. It's a mutual recognition that your life is as equally valued as mine, whether I like you or not. If you're being a loud, obnoxious dickhead, you need to calm down, mate. We inherently understand this dynamic, which is why it often doesn't occur to us to explain it to non Australians. It's our culture. For us, it's intuitive. But what direction will our culture take in the future? Will we treat others equally in the spirit of mateship? Will we live up to our ideals? Will we be everyone's mate? I've spoken about a potential future Australia that I would like to bring, which may seem utopian and idealistic, but I try to temper that with pragmatism. We can save the world, but we can't save everything in it. Even if we take the required action now, climate change will still get worse for decades to come before it ever stabilizes or gets better. But I also want to talk about what happens if we don't act, where I see us going now if we don't change as a nation. Both sides of politics have solidified their support of AUKUS, which bandwagons us to the United States for decades to come. As the US becomes increasingly authoritarian, so do we. We are their lapdog. We do everything they tell us. They point out a bad guy, tell us to fight, and we follow orders. Why didn't we fight when the US and Israel attacked Iran? Well, nobody else did, because they didn't trust anyone else enough to tell them about it. Australia would have sent troops if asked. Albo will do anything to appease the pedophile in chief. The nation we are reliant upon for our security does not trust us enough to include us in their illegal war, but we remain loyal to their commands. Although Labor tries to be more subtle about it, they're still using American anti protest tactics, they're legislating hate speech laws to protect Israel from being offended, and that's just what we know about. The Albanese government has been just as secretive as every other government before them, despite campaigning on transparency. If damaging information would lead us to losing trust or faith in the government is legally allowed to keep it a secret from us. How many professional occupations would we accept that from? Would you trust a doctor that kept secrets about your health? But what else should we expect from a colonial government that always does what the empire tells it to? Which leads me to a thought exercise that should help with comprehension of where I see Australia going. I've talked about harvesting resources from space, so I want you to imagine a time in the not too distant future, maybe 50 years or so from now, when we can. Human beings have figured out how to park an asteroid in near Earth orbit and send people or machines up to mine out the resources and send them back to Earth. Okay? What happens to that asteroid after it has been hollowed out of every last scrap of valuable material? We want to bring in another and keep the process going, right? Well, then we'd need to get rid of the old one. We'd probably fill it up with garbage and the most dangerous waste on Earth, and then throw it at the sun or crash it into Jupiter. It wouldn't matter, its usefulness is gone. The point of this exercise? This is how I see Australia being treated. We are the rock being harvested of all of our finite resources as the wealth is sent elsewhere. Thanks to Albanese expanding AUKUS, we will also be taking the US and UK's nuclear waste and storing it on our soil. Eventually, the time will come when the return on investment is no longer good enough to maintain operations, and just like the hollowed out asteroid, we will be discarded. Australia is too big to defend. There's too much land, too much coast, too much sea, too much sky. We would need a military the size of the US to adequately defend ourselves, which, for comparison's sake, is about 2 million servicemen and women from a country of roughly 340 million people. Australia has a population of around 27 million, so that would be nearly 10% of our population devoted purely to defense. But from whom? Who is a threat to us? China? Our largest two-way trading partner? What threat do we have that doesn't come from our association with the United States? We don't have any major strategic value for military or trade lanes should the world descend into a great power war. We're not in the US's hemisphere, and once our mineral wealth is harvested, what value will we have to the empire? If there is a great power war that somehow doesn't descend into nuclear annihilation, which could happen, if you push the button first and nobody else does, then you alone become the monster that killed the world. Who would want their name branded on that? If we join such a war that is fought with conventional weapons and the threat reaches our shores, I believe they will abandon us because we are not important to them. On a scale of American geopolitics, our nation, our people, are an afterthought. Our politicians and the rich will flee to the US, but what happens to the rest of us? As for climate change, when I say it's a slow burn extinction level event, that's not an exaggeration. We are causing the planet to get warmer through the greenhouse effect. The more carbon we put in the atmosphere, the more heat from the sun gets trapped, the warmer the planet gets. At some point in time, we will hit a tipping point where that global warming will become self-sustaining, and we won't be able to stop it. Even if we shut down all of human civilization's carbon emissions, the planet will still keep getting warmer. To demonstrate what that means long term, let's take a step back and look at our solar system. There are 8 planets in our system. Earth is a third rock from the sun. We're in the Goldilocks zone, not too close to the sun that it's too hot, not so far away that it's too cold. There are 2 planets closer to the sun, Mercury and Venus. If you were asked which of these 2 planets do you think was hotter, you might suspect that Mercury was, since it's closer to the sun, but you would be wrong. Mercury doesn't have much of an atmosphere to hold the heat from the sun. It just dissipates into space. But Venus has an atmosphere dense with carbon dioxide. Venus is trapped in a runaway greenhouse effect. There is so much carbon in the atmosphere, trapping so much heat from the sun, that it literally bakes the surface of the planet to over 400 degrees Celsius, which then releases more carbon into the atmosphere in an endless cycle. Venus is a potential future of Earth if we don't stop climate change. While it might take thousands or even millions of years before the Earth ever got as bad as Venus, all life on Earth would go extinct long before that, and human civilization would collapse much quicker as the habitable regions of the planet disappear and survivors fight over the last scraps of food and water. The last surviving human beings would probably be the descendants of billionaires, the Epstein class, living safely and comfortably in their private island bunkers while the poor tear each other apart. Let's be honest, on a long enough timescale, the Earth will be destroyed anyway when the sun eventually goes supernova in a few billion years. But I think we would like humanity to be around for a long time before that happens, maybe even spread out elsewhere and bring life to the stars. But right now, the biggest threat to the survival of Australia is the United States. Donald Trump has the United States military, along with Israel's, starting a war with Iran in an attempt to begin the Christian Armageddon. He's trying to end the world rather than face the consequences of being a disgusting pedophile, and our government will do anything to appease him. Do you think Australia will get lucky and Jesus will actually come back this time and save us, unlike every other time it's been predicted to happen throughout history? Should we continue to follow the empire that is actively trying to end the world? Well, we've tied ourselves to them for decades to come because of AUKUS, and in that regard, there is no two-party duopoly, there is uniparty agreement. But the threat from the United States isn't just Donald Trump, it's the whole system enabling him. The checks and balances on power have failed. Their government has been infiltrated and corrupted. They are compromised. And the only way to fix it is to acknowledge that it has happened and change. But that change is a threat to the power of the wealthy elite establishment, and to them, that's worse than Trump. Let me be clear, I'm not talking about ending our relations with the US. The American people are not our enemies, but the American government is not our friend either. The January 6th insurrection was an attempted coup. It may have failed, but Donald Trump hasn't given up. He didn't tell the insurrectionists to stand down, he said stand back and stand by, which means go ham now, but be prepared to come back. At some point between now and the next presidential election, there will be another coup attempt. And if the decision comes down to the Supreme Court, like it has in the past, then they will side with Trump and American democracy will end. When that happens, we need to be able to think and act for ourselves, or we will just follow them into that darkness for the fear of not having Big Brother protecting us. So, these are some of the potential futures where I see Australia going now versus a vision of what we could be: a colony being harvested and abandoned, or a nation being built to thrive. Will we rely on luck to prosper, or will we plan for our prosperity? Do we continue to prioritize the profit driven private sector, or do we put people at the center of our civilization? Do we double down on more of the same, or do we recognize the necessity for change? Do we stand on our own, or just heel to our foreign master? Well, I am no one's dog, nor am I anyone's puppet. Making change is much easier said than done, though, and no one person can do it all alone. Fortunately, we could start with around 27 million Aussies with about 8 billion potential teammates to help out. I believe a better world is possible. It won't happen by accident or by luck, though. I can't guarantee success, only that I will try, and success is far more likely if you're actively working towards it. Unfortunately, the average Australian doesn't give a shit about politics. Our politics is deliberately boring as fuck to keep people disengaged. The housing and cost of living crises are maintained to keep us struggling and exhausted, so we are not in a position to make demands. Our elections are pretty much like a team sport. People vote for their team even if they don't like the players. But elections are ultimately a popularity contest. If you can get a movement popular enough, then it can break the hold of the two-party duopoly. Change is possible. We won't get it through lobbying politicians or protesting their decisions, though. To get real lasting change, we need to change the people making the decisions. Good news, though, the demographics are shifting. The boomers have outlasted X, and now voting power is shifting to millennials. We have the chance to change things. How to make it happen is the true challenge. I'm going to need organizational support, but I don't know who to turn to. There are some parties and movements who nominally share some of my perspectives, but I'm not sure of any that represent my politics proper. I'm going to reach out to some of them and see what happens, but if you've got any suggestions, I would love to hear them. If you've stuck around this long, then I truly appreciate it. It's a lot to take in. My name is Luke Hinsley, and I thank you for your time.